And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our live interactive telephone town hall with Congressman John Larson. My name is Robin, and I'll be moderating the call this evening. Tonight, Representative Larson will be taking your questions and discussing the latest attacks on the Social Security Administration, as well as the House Republicans' tax plan that cuts health care and nutrition benefits to pay for tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy. As I mentioned, this is an interactive forum, and we'd love to hear from you this evening. We'll be taking as many questions from participants as we possibly can live on this event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time during the call. You'll be placed in line to speak. The next time you hear your name, it will be myself inviting you to the call, and you'll be able to ask your question directly to the Congressman. Congressman Larson will do his best to answer as many questions as he possibly can this evening. If Congressman is not able to answer your question, you can call 860-278-8888 and leave a message along with your phone number or email address. And I'll repeat that number as we go along through the call this evening. Staff will listen to your voicemail and get back to you with an answer to your question. Again, if you would like to ask the Congressman a question, press *3 anytime throughout this call. And if you'd like to sign up for the Congressman's newsletter to receive updates and information about future events, you can press *6 on your telephone keypad. Now I'd like to turn the call over to Congressman Larson. Congressman, you are live, and the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Robin, and I thank everybody for joining us. When we're back in the district, we like to do as many events, and we've done 2 earlier today of small town halls, etc. But this technology allows us the opportunity to reach out to far more many people, and obviously, if you're on this call, it's because you're concerned, and there's an awful lot that's going on in Washington, D.C. just over the last 2 weeks. And the way I like to frame it is like this. I call it the 3 R's. And we're not talking about reading, writing, and arithmetic here. What we're talking about is resolutions, things that have been rescinded, and also the big reconciliation bill. Let me start with a resolution because I think that that's important to understand what's happening during this time. We put forward a resolution, which is something the minority party can do, and I specifically asked for a resolution. Some have commented, may have seen the clip that appeared on the internet where I was grilling our Republican colleagues for not having Elon Musk come before the committee that has cognizance over Social Security, where he has expressed a desire to cut. And so, Musk, as you know, is not an employee and is not a commissioner. He's not a volunteer. He's what they call a special volunteer, which of course is perfectly legal, but does not prevent you from coming before Congress and testifying, especially when you designate that, well, there's 3 parts of the budget that consume 70% of our expenditures, and they're military defense, Medicare and Medicaid, and Social Security. And given the fact that Social Security is the only one of those 3 that has a trust fund, it did not miss the attention of a lot of people that that trust fund, which is your money, has $2.7 trillion in it, billion, excuse me. And Mr. Trump, as you all know, gave Elon the task of finding $2 trillion that he could make in cuts with regard to the federal budget. And Elon had been about that task, even despite their most recent breakup last Friday. I don't know whether they'll be able to patch it up or not, but it's clearly got to be interesting to all people. But when I say the 3 R's, we put forward a resolution of inquiry, which is a tool that the minority has that insists that the majority has to call a hearing and bring the group forward. Well, or the individual. Well, they complied with the rule. They held the hearing, but they didn't bring Musk forward. And so, of course, as you might imagine, Democrats were upset by the fact that that wasn't the case. But Elon continues, along with President Trump, to believe that they're above the law and that they don't have to answer to Congress. And I don't expect that we'll see him, especially now that he's no longer there. And after, I don't know if they'll have a makeup or not, but my guess, if money is involved, they'll have a makeup, and we'll go from there. But the first is that resolution, and that is something that's very important. Why? Because the Republicans then changed the rule before we left to no longer allow for a resolution of inquiry. That's important because when you're in the minority, that's the only way that you can seek to get your questions answered and have come before us not only Elon Musk, but the Doge participants that have now been allowed to go before, and go into Social Security and look at people's personal data and information. The whole point of the lawsuits, and last Friday as well, the Supreme Court ruled overturning two lower courts, who both upheld the fact that people's private information in Social Security should not be violated, and that Doge had to make the case as to why they felt they should have access to people's personal information in Social Security. You may have also read why the previous Social Security administrator was let go, because he was resisting that. And then just last Friday, as some of you I'm sure are aware, the Supreme Court ruled that, well, no, the way we see this is that Doge ought to be able to go forward and look at people's documents while we're trying to assess whether or not they need that information or not. That makes no sense to anyone, I think, who just has plain common sense. The lower court's rulings that, well, listen, before you can have access, you've got to make the case. The case that Doge and the Trump administration were making is that there's fraud, abuse, and waste. Well, listen, everybody's against fraud, abuse, and waste. But show us where that fraud, abuse, and waste are so that, you can make your case that Social Security is in such bad shape that it requires you to have personal access to everybody's data and information. Suffice it to say, we remain skeptical about that and think that they don't have a legal right to stand on, and have submitted legislation specifically, along with Rich Neal, the ranking Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee that has cognizance over Social Security, that no, we're preventing them from doing this unless they can make their case. Because people's right to make sure that their documents are private and theirs is essential in a free and democratic society. The third thing, of course, is reconciliation as part of the 3 R's here, and that has to deal with the large budget bill that they adopted. A budget bill that provides billionaires with tax cuts. Listen, people don't get upset about tax cuts in general, and frankly, the Democrats had a tax cut proposal. Quite different, I might add, but Rich Neal proposed that what we do is provide people at $400,000 and below with the majority of the tax cuts that they're going to need during this post global COVID pandemic that people are still recovering from, and during this global inflationary time that we're going through, that we ought to be able to provide people with assistance. Far different than the Republican proposal that says, no, what we're going to do is provide tax cuts, 70% of which goes to the nation's wealthiest 1%. We're saying, no, where that tax cut should go is to the people who are below 400,000 and below. Now, not many people are making 400,000 either, but we're trying to be fair here and accommodate. I don't think that many people above 400,000 are hurting in this economy, and certainly are not in need of this tax cut. But for those who are and who need it, we're more than happy to provide them with it. But we also want accountability. And accountability means this. The nation's wealthiest 1%, we're paying 39% in terms of taxes to the federal government starting with Bill Clinton, the last president who both balanced the budget and had no deficit because he followed and was made sure that we had no deficit accumulation and that we paid our bills. This is what we're focusing on and trying to require of our Republican colleagues. But instead, what they're saying is that, no, we need a tax cut, 70% of which goes to the wealthiest 1%. And here's the real kicker. Paid for by cutting the SNAP program. For those of you that don't know what the SNAP program is, and I bet most of you do, that's the nation's #1 nutritional program that not only helps children, it also helps veterans. It also helps the disabled. It also helps working women as well. Also, they threw 16 million people off of their health care to save money. So in other words, they haven't been able legislatively to successfully repeal the Affordable Care Act, but they're using this executive decision to kick 16 million people off of it. And we've heard from people in Connecticut already who remain on it, but their premiums have risen as well. And for what purpose? So that you can provide less than 1% of the nation with a larger income tax that they already had. I am going to make a wild guess here and say they're really not hurting. I think many of them are embarrassed by the fact, and I think, in fact, that's part of the reason that the fallout occurred between Elon Musk and Trump was that, well, Elon said, well, and it didn't even address the deficit that I had explained that's why I was doing this, all for the concern about not having a deficit. Instead, it increases the deficit overall. And that's been verified by every economist that's taken a look at this. And it's why Elon acted the way that he did. So this is the situation that we found ourselves in just in the last 2 weeks. And so before we left Congress, they had turned down the resolution and didn't come before Congress with Elon Musk or any of Doge. The Supreme Court acted and said Doge now can go into Social Security and look at people's personal data. They then they also rescinded the fact that Social Security should receive any federal money. Now, I don't know what they have against Big Bird, and I don't know what they have against the Cookie Monster, etc., but apparently they're saying there's some kind of communistic plot, and this is all part of a woke left-wing agenda. Really? I don't think that's what the majority of Americans feel about this. But understand that if you speak out or are perceived to be speaking out against this current administration, you're going to be punished. And then thirdly, with regard to the bill on reconciliation, putting forward, making permanent Trump's tax cut that he passed in 2017 that expires this year in 2025, to then take and make that permanent and guarantee that 70% of that will go to the nation's wealthiest 1% is beyond obscene. At a time when working men and women need all the help that we can get. We have answers and solutions, both in terms of what people should be getting with respect to tax breaks, and also, and very clearly and most importantly, what they should be receiving with regard to the nation's number one anti-poverty program for the elderly and number one anti-poverty program for children, Social Security. That's what my focus continues to be. That's just happened in the last 2 weeks. These bills are now sitting before the Senate, and it's going to be up to them to decide what they're going to do. If they agree with the House, they'll pass the bill, and it will go on to the President. If they amend the bill, it will come back to the House. Or they can completely disagree, and the bill will die in the United States Senate. But those are the options that face it. We're happy that you've joined us on the line. And now let me throw it open. And Robin, if you can, I'm sure you will, just again repeat to people how they are able to get on and ask a question. We enjoy doing these town halls, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Congressman. Again, if you would like to ask a question, press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time during this call. And if you would like to sign up for Congressman's newsletter to receive updates and information about future events, you can press *6 on your keypad. Congressman, we've got our first question, which was submitted online by Lynn. Lynn says, I am 68 years old and collecting Social Security. How worried should I be that my benefit will be compromised?
Well, thank you, Lynn, for your question. First and foremost, this is a time that creates an awful lot of hysteria. And how could it not, given the chaos and the uncertainty that's going on in Washington? But let me assure you of this. First and foremost, the Social Security Trust Fund, which Republicans call an entitlement, is not an entitlement. It's your money. This is money that you have paid into the trust fund. Now, some will argue, say, yes, but the business community, the company I used to work with, paid half of that as well. And yes, that's true. They did pay. You paid your half, they paid theirs. But that's a full tax write-off for the business. And who, if that's a full tax write-off, pays for that? Well, that, of course, would be the government, which means you have fully paid for what is an earned benefit that belongs to you in a trust fund that contains $2.7 trillion, but hasn't been enhanced since Richard Nixon was President of the United States. So the key issue that we're proposing is not to privatize Social Security, which is the intent of the Trump administration, and I'll say more about that as we go on, but to enhance the existing system so that people who are already receiving Social Security and haven't seen an enhancement since 1971 get what they need to make it through these difficult times, and that future generations also are educated in terms of understanding the unique benefit and the unique guarantee and the unique insurance program that this is for the American people, further underscoring the genius of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Thank you, Congressman. Next question, also submitted online by Barbara. Barbara asks, what is the current status of the budget bill?
Well, thank you, Barbara, for that question. Right now, the reconciliation bill, or as I like to call it, they call it MAG, I said, Make America Greedy Again, is in the Senate. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but when you consider that 70% of that budget goes to the 70% of the tax cuts goes to the nation's wealthiest 1%, at a time when, frankly, they really don't need it. Instead, it should be distributed, as Democrats have suggested, to people under $400,000 so that they can assist and help themselves. Unfortunately, what we've seen on tech so far is that this issue is getting worse. The House bill will result in 16 million Americans losing their health insurance. The text the Senate came out with has even more Medicaid cuts. We're still waiting on numbers, meaning all this is going to be decided over the next couple of weeks because Donald Trump has given them a deadline of July the 1st to make sure they get what he calls the big, beautiful bill passed. We're still waiting on numbers of what that means for residents on Medicaid, but it will very likely be more than a 16 million. We're also learning even more about the cost. A new analysis from CBO came out yesterday that said when you factor in the damage that the bill does to the economy, it's going to cost even more money than previously thought. We need everyone to continue to not only speak up. There were rallies all across the country this past weekend. And we need everybody to speak up and get it out there that it's not right that we're bankrupting the country so that millionaires can get an $89,000 tax cut while Americans go hungry and lose their health insurance. Yes, there's a thread of truth to the fact that they say, oh, no, we're providing everybody with a tax cut. And, well, indeed, they are for some. But while the millionaire gets $89,000, the person making $50,000 or less gets 72 cents a day. That's what we like to call disparity that needs to be changed and reversed so that people that are in the greatest need are getting the money they need to survive.
Thank you, Congressman. Once again, folks, if you have a question, you'd like to ask a question this evening, *3 on your telephone keypad. Congressman, next question comes from Marilyn. Marilyn says, how can we get restoration of funding at NIH for Alzheimer's?
Well, Marilyn, thank you for your question. One of the worst things the Trump administration is doing is going after medical research. This has been both an important tool in keeping us ahead of the curve and finding the most innovative and creative ways to deal with disease. And by cutting the necessary research, it only hurts us and pushes us back. They are attempting to make across-the-board cuts to research. They're going after institutions. They're targeting research that they disagree with. That's a tragedy. It means all of us will suffer. As Fareed Zakaria has pointed out, it's not just harming those of us who suffer from or will suffer from disease, it's harming America's global leadership. Fortunately, thanks to the leadership of Attorney General Tong in our own state, many of these attacks have been stopped by the courts. We're going to continue to fight for funding in Congress, led by our own Rosa DeLauro, and I think that's the best way for us to proceed.
Thank you, Congressman. Next question comes from Patty. Patty says, what changes are being made to the Affordable Care Act? I rely on this insurance since I am not yet 65.
Well, thank you, Patty. According to the Congressional Budget Office, 16 million Americans could lose health care access under this proposal due to Medicaid cuts and the expiring Affordable Care Act provisions. According to Protect Our Care, a majority of Americans believe health care spending should be increased, not cut. This plan is the largest cut to Medicaid in its history, cutting benefits by $715 billion. Medicaid pays for 2 in 5 births in the United States. Your constituent and good friend of ours, Rod Yearwood, was able to save more than $1,300 a month on his family's premium thanks to the Affordable Care Act. But when these expires, he will see his costs rise again. And let's also to consider 50 million Americans have gained health insurance since passage of the Affordable Care Act, including 20 million through the provision the Republicans that is about to expire.
Thank you, Congressman. Next question comes from Louise, and Louise asks, can we prevent the administration from cutting off SNAP benefits?
Yeah, hi, Louise. Thank you for your questions. The Republicans plan to slash SNAP nutrition benefits by $313 billion, which will impact over 42 million Americans who rely on it, including nearly 41,000 people just in Connecticut's 1st congressional district. While Republicans focus on lowering the cost of silencers for firearms, they are doing nothing to improve the safety in our schools and are slashing funding for Pell Grants and allow low-income students to pursue a college education, including 63,000 Connecticut residents. Republicans want to repeal the clean energy tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, including incentives we secured for clean hydrogen and fuel cells, cutting $336 billion in investments in the clean energy economy that have created 100,000 jobs.
Thank you, Congressman. Now we're going to take our caller live. We've got Frank from Manchester. Hi, Frank. You're live on the call with Congressman Larson. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. I'm concerned about a lot of things, but the Social Security Trust Fund is something that is beyond my understanding. Are there truly funds set aside in trust, or they should be there and they've been used?
Congressman, would you like me to repeat the question? Did we lose the Congressman? Ladies and gentlemen, while we wait for the Congressman to rejoin the call, I want to remind you that you can press *3 on your telephone keypad to get into the call queue to ask your question. And if you're enjoying this update and you want some more information about future events, you can press *6 on your telephone keypad. That's another way to subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter. It's online at larson.house.gov.
I want to thank.
Are you there on the line?
Yes, I am, and I apologize, but I want to thank the caller because this question comes up frequently, and actually we were out doing, 2 forums in the district today where this came up again. Number one, Americans should know that the Social Security Trust Fund is separate, and A, has nothing to do with the national debt, and B, is your money. What that means is this. First and foremost, you hear people referring to Social Security, most notably Republicans, who say it's an entitlement. It is not an entitlement. It is an earned benefit, your benefit. How do you know this, and how is this easily verifiable? All you have to do is look at your pay stub. It says FICA. What does that stand for? Federal Insurance Contribution. The insurance, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The contribution, yours. Now, in the case of Social Security, people will say, well, yes, but the business pays part of that too. That is correct, they do. But they also get a full tax write-off for that. So who pays for that? Well, that would be the government. And who is the government? Last time I checked, it was we, the people. So, in fact, this is not an entitlement. This is an earned benefit that you have both paid for and contributed yourself, and that also the government, again, we, the people, have paid for. So no one should ever feel that they are on any kind of welfare program that others would suggest this is. It's your money. And Congress, to be very clear about this, hasn't acted in over 50-plus years to enhance this program. If it did, we wouldn't even be on this call tonight. People would be still raving about how Social Security continues to protect, help, and assist the people that need it most, as FDR intended, but Congress bears the blame here in being negligent and not acting specifically to correct this.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next caller is Katie from West Hartford. Katie, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Go ahead, Katie. Katie, you're live on the call.
Hi, my name is Katie Hollingsworth. I'm from the town of West Hartford. My question relates to the Supreme Court decision that was done today in regards to individuals who are transgender. I'm just wondering what you're going to be doing for us in Washington as well as locally to ensure that individuals who are trans have the same rights that they deserve, just like everybody else, that they have rights to health care and to safety and their ability to live.
Well, of course, I couldn't agree with you more strongly in what the Trump administration is doing to target the LGBTQ community is flat out cruel. Today, the Supreme Court ruled that states can ban gender transition care for minors. No politician should get between a family, a doctor, and their private medical decisions. This is part of a broader attack on the LGBTQ rights from this administration. Today, they also announced that they would end the suicide hotline. Imagine that. They would end the suicide hotline for LGBTQ youth. For youth, for children, for people that we all know. Trump and his administration don't care who they hurt as long as they can score political points and the more that they can try to pit Americans against fellow Americans. I'm proud to co-sponsor the Equality Act in Congress, which would expand civil rights protection to LGBTQ community Americans. We will continue to fight and protect all Americans' rights and stand up to this brute in the White House who is politically motivated and comes out with these statements designed to create hatred and also to pit Americans against fellow Americans. It's time for all Americans, not just members of Congress, to rise up and speak out. We've seen this before, and it has to stop.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question was submitted online by Bill, and Bill asks, what is the status of the big, beautiful bill?
Well, thank you, Bill, for that question, but the status of the big, beautiful bill is, as you're probably aware, the bill passed the House of Representatives by a very narrow vote. And let me add that there were more than 21 Republicans who came out and said that they were going to oppose the big, beautiful bill. But at the end of the day, and I usually read Representative Massey's statement that he gave, he neither attacked Trump as president or the Republicans. He just laid out the facts of why this was such a bad bill for a party that used to call itself fiscally responsible. And yet, as he noted, what this bill is not only the inequality that exists in this and how they take food out of children's mouths and kick people off of health care to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy is obscene. Even billionaires are embarrassed by what's happening. And as you saw with the fallout with Elon Musk and Donald Trump, it didn't do anything to even address the national debt. So we will remain vigilant in terms of trying to stop this, but it now travels to the United States Senate. And as you may have heard me say to one of the earlier callers, so far, the news seems to be getting worse, not better, but essentially there are a couple of options. One, they can adopt what the House did, and if they adopt it and vote on it, it'll go directly to the president. They can change the legislation, as some are acknowledging, maybe for the worse, and that will come back to the House, and the House will either adopt that or change it and send it back to the Senate. But there has to be approval in both houses before it goes to the president for a signature. And that's the great hope here, that people are going to be able to get to their senators and representatives and get them to understand how this is impacting people's lives far beyond the gloss that they're trying to provide for this. This is far from a beautiful bill. This bill is an atrocity, and the more people learn about it, the more they understand that that's the case. And thank you for your question.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next caller is Jennifer from Southington. Jennifer, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, you just kind of answered it in your last response about, having people speak up, because in a couple of weeks, depending if the Senate votes in favor or not of it. So I just was like, I just can't believe. I just hope maybe I could contact some more of my senators and everything, and hopefully there's some way. So you're saying it can basically go back to the House of Representatives to be changed, possibly, right?
Correct. But you gave me a little opening here, and I can't resist the former history teacher in myself. But I want to tell you a little story about George Washington. And before you're all saying, oh my God, in 1775, a full year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, George Washington, as many of you will recall, was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, and they were stationed just outside of Boston, while the then Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the Continental Congress was blocked. It seemed intransient. It seemed like they couldn't get along or find common ground. And it was mostly divided between the Tories, who favored reconciliation with the King of England, and of course the Ben Franklins and Thomas Jeffersons and John Adams, who were strongly in favor of independence. But from Washington's viewpoint, and what the British had successfully done in terms of marshaling the forces to close down the ports and make economic insecurity, he felt and was very alarmed that the Tories would prevail and that there would be reconciliation with the king, something that he thought was the worst thing possible. But then a gentleman named Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet. It was called Common Sense. It was the most well-read document in the 13 colonies other than the Bible. And it was the people in the 13 colonies and beyond who chatted with one another. And remember, they didn't have radio, they didn't have TV, they didn't have the internet. All they had was each other. They had newspapers and they had pamphlets, and they were well read, and they were concerned about what was going on. And given the choice between reconciliation with the king, just last week there were protests, last Saturday were protests all over the state and all over the country called No Kings, because the American people believe that we should kneel to no one. No authoritarian figure can impose their will on the people. Well, we fast forward to today, and it's still true. No one person can impose their authoritarian rule on the people when the people speak out. And when Washington became president, he brought Thomas Paine to the White House and credited him and Common Sense for turning people around. And Paine said, it wasn't me. Yes, the pamphlet contributed to it, but it was people speaking out. It was people letting their intentions and their beliefs known. And they weren't going to stand for this Congress that couldn't make up its mind, that was constantly at one another and not making any progress when they desired independence and home rule. What was true in 1775 is true in 2025. And that's why we need the help of every citizen to call out and indicate that this is not the way that we're going to go, that we're not going to take food out of children's mouths and knock people off of their health care in order to pay for tax cuts for billionaires, that instead we want to invest our money where it should be going in people who need it the most, and make sure that we solidify our programs like Social Security and not take them apart from within and disassemble them for privatization so that a very few will be able to grab the money that's there and exists. That's the most important thing that we can do. That's why we're so committed to this, and I'm so grateful that people are on this call tonight.
Thank you, Congressman. We've got another question for you, sir. We've got Richard, who submitted his question online. Richard says, a number of environmental regulations have been relaxed under the current administration. What can be done to address global warming?
Thank you, Maynard. Clearly, fighting climate change under the Trump administration, as you note, is an uphill battle. Our president doesn't even believe that we have had any impact on rising temperatures, rising sea levels, and the increase in natural disasters that are well documented and, frankly, common sense. I applaud our Attorney General for suing the Trump administration for unlawfully canceling EPA grants to the states. And I encourage you to reach out to your local and state reps to apply for conservation and pollution grants still available at EPA and the Department of the Interior. We have to continue to fight back by using the levers of government that exist and pointing out what the issue is and demanding that we receive these grants for the benefits we know will not only attribute to us today, but as importantly, what it will mean for tomorrow and the future of our children and our planet.
Thank you, Congressman. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one last question. Congressman Susan writes, if Medicaid funding is cut, what can the state do to save people who rely on it? Congressman, would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh, no. I thought the person was going to speak. Well,
oh, no,
yeah,
this is an online question, sir. Mike.
Thank you, Susan. I'm sorry. Well, listen, Governor Lamont and his team are monitoring these developments closely, and we've been in close touch with the governor, and I have full confidence that he's going to do the right thing. If this bill does pass, it's going to mean a tremendous burden on the people and on our state. Ironically, Connecticut is in a better place than many red states who do not have the economy that we have and have more of their residents on Medicaid. This whole thing is a shell game. They're going to lie and say they aren't cutting Medicaid, but they know that's going to be the impact. Remember, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that it will mean 16 million Americans losing their health insurance. They're shifting the demand to the state, which means it's not saving money, it's just forcing governors to come up with the solution and take the blame. And as resourceful as Governor Lamont and Attorney General Tong can be, this is something that is a national problem and requires the federal government to step in. I know the last thing the governor is going to do is make sure that he can make the best of what they've given to protect our Medicaid recipients, but the first effort must be stopping them from needing to make these impossible choices.
Thank you, Congressman. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our live event this evening, and we'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us for this telephone town hall with Congressman John Larson. If we were not able to get to your question this evening, you can leave a voicemail after the event by calling 860-278-8888. I'm going to repeat that number for you. The number is 860-278-8888. And again, if you would like to sign up for Congressman's newsletter to receive updates and information about future events, you can go ahead and sign up online at larson.house.gov. Now I'd like to turn the call back over to Congressman Larson to close us out this evening. Congressman?
Well, again, I want to just take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us this evening. As always, I think you learn best when you listen to your constituents. What I want to assure you is that we will be down there fighting as hard as we possibly can. And yes, I know you know we're in the minority. And as I said at the outset, we're going to continue to focus on everything that we can do to prevent the disastrous cuts that are being made, and also to make sure that we're holding this administration accountable. But I think the little story about George Washington still rings true. I'm proud to represent the people of the 1st Congressional District, and just listening, as I'm sure all of you have tonight, to the intelligent questions that people have asked and put forward, heartens and gives one hope. But we need more. And frankly, we need more from each and every individual. In the last presidential election, more people didn't vote than who voted for both presidential candidates. People have been lost hope and lost faith with their government. But remember, going back to what Washington said to Paine, what's going to make the difference in Congress and with this administration is not any individual member of Congress. There's no savior for every individual. What it's going to take is the American citizenry, meaning all of us and each of you, to speak out, speak your mind, and prevent these disastrous changes from happening, and to call them out for what they are. That's the great hope of a democracy. I still, as a former civics and history teacher, have great belief and faith, not only in the system that we put forward, as awkward and cumbersome as it is, but more so in the people, because ultimately you are the ones that will make the change. And it's not just about talking to your own member of Congress. It's about talking to your neighbors and friends and others and saying and signing petitions and pursuing the fact that you're not going to stand for this and you want your government to know. And if you don't want to call, you can write, you can email, you can send in a letter, whatever it is that you feel most comfortable doing. But for God's sake, for the sake of the nation, and for your children's sake, speak out. America needs you. God bless you, and thanks for joining us tonight.